This is the show about the people who create, amplify, and influence our culture and how they do it. Want to capture lightning in a bottle? Want your content to spread like wildfire? I'm Ben Kaplan, and let's break the internet. Welcome to Break the Internet. I'm chatting with Mark Schaefer. And Mark, you're a marketing influencer. You're a prolific book author. And we're going to talk about all of that. But specifically, I love this idea that you talk about the difference between building a personal brand and becoming famous. And there's a lot of people listening who maybe would like to do both. But what is the difference between building a personal brand and becoming famous in the content in the context of social media and content creation?
Well, I think both are interesting. I think both are important and represent their own opportunities. But this distinction, Ben, really sort of landed on me when I was a speaker at South by Southwest this year. And one of the sessions was about building your personal brand. I thought, well, that's interesting because that's what I'm all about. I'm really, I wrote the book, the best-selling book on it. I've studied this for many, many years. And what it really was about, it wasn't really about building and curating a personal brand. It was about becoming famous on TikTok, essentially. And I thought, well, that's really interesting because that's not really what I consider a personal brand. That's really sort of being famous, creating fame, becoming known for maybe it's singing, or maybe it's doing skits, or maybe it's doing whatever you're doing on TikTok to sort of get millions and millions of followers and hopefully get a brand contract. In the early days of influence were really built on what you knew. This was before the TikTok days, even before the Instagram days.
You wrote the book Return on Influence 2012. This is early days. This is still where Instagram was like super inexpensive way to market, and you could reach people, and it was before it was built up and all of that.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not even sure Instagram was even, really out at that point. But, in 2012, what I saw, Ben, was the power in the world was shifting. That, in my days as a young guy in marketing, it was all about broadcasting. It was the people that had power were the people at the TV stations and the advertising agencies, and the people that would, how would I become known 25 or 30 years ago? That was someone else's decision, right? They had to pick you to be on TV. They had to pick you to be in their magazine. I saw the world shifting, the power shifting. With the beginning of the internet, we all had an opportunity to have influence in this world.
And you can kind of like raise your own hand, right?
No, that's right. The barriers were low.
Yes. And say,
you could create your own content.
A thought leader. Yeah.
It didn't matter where you came from. It didn't matter if you went to the right school or married into the right family, or how much money you had, or the color of your skin. Everybody had a chance to create influence, and more importantly, which wasn't obvious back in 2012, create an audience that was actionable, that you would influence. And I saw this happening, and I knew this was going to be interesting for brands. And I predicted at the end of this book, nobody was using the word influencer back in 2012. I said, but in the next 2 years, influence marketing is going to become a mainstream marketing channel. And if you go to Google Trends and put in influencer marketing, 2012, nothing, 2013, nothing, 2014, hockey stick. So that was sort of the world I grew up in, where you created influence from your content, from your expertise in your field, not necessarily your personality, not necessarily being an entertainer. And so the world has sort of shifted.
It is somewhat, but it's interesting because we've had a lot of guests on the show and that have and we've looked at things overall. I mean, Facebook acquired Instagram, purchased Instagram in 2012, actually. So it was this pivotal moment. But what I've spoken with a lot of creators or influencers who say, I mean, when they start out, usually you try a lot of things, right? And a lot of things, some work, some doesn't work. You kind of build an audience. It's not universally true, but a lot of the ones that have become successful actually start focusing more because they start realizing, what works. They start getting known for something else, and they start saying, and so in some sense, they are not just like, I don't know, anything that might get an eyeball entertaining. They're like, no, it's incredibly noisy. There's so much you can consume. People need to know when they come and see Mark or Ben or whomever, they know what they're getting and they expect it. And wouldn't you say in some ways that is brand building, maybe not like global thought expertise in writing books, but it's like building something that you stand for, that people can expect.
100%. And I don't mean to imply that like it's like there's two different things now, or there's no overlap, or one's replaced the other. I think these two sort of areas coexist. And I think so. When I did my research, what I found is like everybody who becomes known in their field, they accomplish, there's 4 steps. And the first one is exactly what you said. You've got to be clear about what you want to be known for. Where do you fit in this ecosystem, right? So even if you're doing hair or makeup or something like that, you can't just do what everybody else is doing, right? It's got to be, I saw someone on TikTok the other day, her thing is like she changes her hair color like every week. And so there's certain things that go with that, right? Is it she damaging her hair? How does she repair her hair? She takes people along on that adventure. So she's found her niche in a very crowded field. She is, I encourage people to think about, how do you finish this sentence? Only I. Now that's really hard. It takes some introspection. But if you can finish that sentence, only I, or you talked about corporate brand building, only we, you've got to be able to think that through, because that helps you focus on, how am I different? How do I stand out? Why do people love me? Why do people want to buy things from me? Why do they trust me? How do I stand out?
And I think it's a little bit harder than it looks or sounds to answer that question.
Oh, it can be very, very hard.
Because it's also not just what's in your own mind. Like, oh, it's clear to me. It's clear that obviously I'm the only one doing it this way, or the only one doing these things, but it's also how other people perceive it. And that when you have other creators and they get to the point, especially like monetization, where you start to have bigger audiences, you want to get paid to do things, and other brands or companies or agencies are going to come and be like, oh, Mary, she's the person who does X. And if they can't explain it easily, it's very hard for them to sell it. And it's hard for you to sell yourself. So it becomes like, can you make it simple enough that other people get it who don't study you all day long?
That's a very important consideration, Ben. And another one is, whatever you decide on, is there an audience big enough who cares, right? So, I mean, you see that problem. And one of the sort of myths, I think, in marketing right now is people say, oh, if you're not making it, you probably haven't niched down enough. And I disagree. I think people can niche down too quickly and put themselves in a niche so small that there's not enough people that care, and there's not enough people that can pay for it. So, I mean, don't start off too niche too quickly. My advice is start a little bit more broadly and then listen really carefully to your audience. Where are they pulling you? The world will kind of tell you eventually where you fit. I often say we create content, but content also creates us, because your audience will respond. And one day they'll say, oh, Ben, that show you did with I'm just dreaming up an example here, Ben. That show you did with Mark Schaefer. Wow, that was awesome. He really blew my mind. He taught me something I never heard before. And then you think, I'll do more of that. So the content is forming you, and maybe you've even experienced that in your own career as you've tried to find your niche.
It's often a faster process to create things and get feedback and adjust than
Yeah,
to lock
100%.
yourself in a room and be like, I'm going to come up with the most brilliant idea that no one on TikTok has ever seen before. That's pretty
I
hard
agree.
to do
Start.
that.
Just start. Yeah. I mean, really.
So you said number one, you said be clear of what you want to be known for. What are the other three things?
Well, number two, so number one is sort of like, what is the story about me? I think you said this very well. You've got to be able to describe what you do and what makes you different in a very succinct, simple way. Number two, now that you have a story, where are you going to tell the story? Is there a certain place or a certain certain place that you can own that's different from everybody else? A quick example, I have a friend, maybe you've heard of John Lee Dumas. John Lee was learning how to be an entrepreneur. He was listening to podcasts. He said, I've binged through all these episodes and now I've got to wait a week to the next one. Why doesn't somebody create a podcast about entrepreneurship every single day? So he did it. So he found a way to maneuver using the available channels that sort of made him distinctive. So that's a possibility to explore. That's number two. Number three is creating the actual content to be known. You've got to show up. You've got to do it consistently. You can't give up. It takes a long time to get momentum and gather an audience and get that feedback. As you say, my personal recommendation is to pick one channel. To stand out today, you've got to be great. You cannot be great in 20 places. So if you have a dream of doing a podcast, if you have a dream of doing videos on TikTok, whatever is going to make you happy and bring you joy, that's what you should pursue, because you're going to have to stick with this a long time. What we're seeing today is a lot of creators are burning out. They're saying, I need to take a mental health break. So you're going to be spending a lot of time with this. So pick some content form that you love, and don't worry about the competition so much, because there's only one you. You've got to bring your own energy, your own angle. The most important thing is you are doing something that you love, because you're going to be sticking with it for a long time. And then the fourth thing is to build an actionable audience that is not necessarily the same as a social media audience. A social media audience many times are weak relational links. You put something out on social media, maybe you feel like you're throwing, a bottle in the ocean, waiting for someone to pick it up.
You mean that it's not necessarily an actual audience? It's not someone just like who likes your content. That's a very low level action.
So what you want to do is get subscribers, right? And especially if you can get in a professional sense, if you can even build like an email list, because an email list, those are people that have raised their hand saying, I believe in you. I love you. I want to know more. I want to know more. Those are the people that are going to buy stuff from you someday, right? They're going to buy your seminars and your courses and your books, and your speeches and your workshops. So if you can, build an email list through some sort of exclusive content, that's the best scenario of all. But so it's really trying to think about who is going to make my dreams come true and focus on those people. Especially look at clues like who is sharing my content. I call that your alpha audience, the most important audience. They are activating. They are creating organic advocacy for your content and what you're doing. And you should know those people by name and treat them very well.
How much do you think it's harder now to become a creator, to become an influencer? Is it harder because a lot of things have been done before, and also because it's like it's kind of like a known thing. Like, if someone wanted to be like kind of like rich and famous out of nowhere, if someone would be like, I want to be a musician. I want to be an athlete. I want to have a skill. Now it's like, this is a legitimate way to become that. Is it harder than it was before to stand out?
No. And here's why. It's always been hard to stand out. So if who is, 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 like to be great, you've got to be like LeBron James, right? Is it easy to be LeBron James? No, it's never been easy to be LeBron James or Michael Jordan or Wilt Chamberlain or whoever the best basketball player is. If you want to enter a tier where you can monetize, you can't just be competent. Your competency doesn't create conversations. Somebody who's great, someone who stands out. So, and it is hard. And I encourage everyone who wants to try to do it. I think there's still many, many opportunities to find your niche. Again, because there's only one you. There's only one person like you that has your attitude and your background and your heritage and your experiences. You can tell a different story than anybody else. And you don't have to be LeBron James to make money. There's plenty of basketball players that make money. I would say I'm not LeBron James, but I do very, very well. I've never spent a dime on advertising in my life. And I've got a very successful global company.
How do you think about, I know, whether it's, your LinkedIn that has 34,000 followers or it's Twitter that's in the hundreds of thousands. How do you think, I know you've spent a lot of effort building your brand, what you're known for. So people come just to see you, not necessarily the content you produce, but how do you, let's say you do have some traction, someone listening, someone watching, and they want to get to the point where it's like they're constantly having to invent really amazing content to keep fueling what they've created. Versus at a certain point, people come, you have this baseline, no matter what you do, you have an audience. What does it take to get there, which is this higher level of sort of audience recognition and engagement?
So there's really two things to think about. And, when I listen to your question, it's like, okay, I'm creating all this great content. When can I stop? And the answer to that is never. It's competitive, right? And I have studied this probably more than any human being on earth. How do you create an audience? And the key is creating an emotional connection, whether it's a person or a company, right? If I say Coca-Cola is building a hotel in your town, you could probably imagine what it's going to be like, what it's going to feel like, what it's going to sound like. That's the emotional expectation that comes with a brand. And it's the same for people. But you can't create that without a lot of effort, a lot of consistent effort. And I've looked at how do people build their audiences? What are the keys? There's lots of little tricks you can do. But here is the number one strategy. It's so far ahead of number two, nothing is even close. And this is it. You've got to double down on the content, period. You might be able to use some SEO or something to trick people on a link. You can't trick people to read it or view it. You can't trick people to subscribe. You can't trick people to give you a big open rate, or to stay subscribed to you, or best of all, to recommend you to other people. That's how you really grow your audience. There's only one way. It's got to be great content. And as I have, I've had a blog. I just hit my 15th year anniversary. I've had a podcast for 12 years. I've written 12 books. And here's what's in my mind. Every single moment I create content, I will never let you down. You may not agree with me. You may not particularly like this one, but it's going to be worth your time. It's going to be interesting. And I'm going to give you everything I've got every single day. And there's no shortcut.
And let's say you get to this level of people, you start getting known, you start having a kind of a built-in audience to be the go-to person in your field, to be the best or be really recognized, not just among that. What is required there? What is that extra step that you have to do? Let's say you commit to the content, you get content, you're thought of as thought leader, but to be the go-to person. what do you have to do? What do you have to accomplish?
Honestly, and this is an answer that might surprise you. It really is consistency. It's not giving up. When I wrote my book on personal branding, I interviewed 97 people around the world who are known in their field. And at the end of the interview, I said, if you had one piece of advice for someone who wants to stand out and be the go-to person in their field, known in their field, what would it be? Almost every person said, people quit too soon. Don't give up. Be resilient. Be tenacious. And that's the big difference. I see a lot of people who are heading in the right direction, and then it's just not going fast enough for them. I mean, it's not a hockey stick. It is, it's just slow but sure. Do you like the Black Keys, the rock band?
Okay,
sure, the Black Keys? Sure.
Yeah.
I got to meet the Black Keys. I got to go backstage a few years ago when they were just really getting to the next level. I saw them. They were playing at a theater that had like 2,000 people. Like 2-3 years later, they were selling out Madison Square Garden. They were just really launching. So I talked to Patrick Carney, the drummer. I said, because I was interested, like I was working on this personal brand stuff, right? I said, Patrick, what was it? Like, what was that ignition point? What was the thing? Was it luck? Was it someone you knew? Like, what launched you to the next level? And he thought for a minute. He said, there isn't one. He said, we've been touring for 6 years. We've created 6 albums. We work and work and work, and we don't give up. And we want every album to be a little better than the last one. We want every tour to be a little better than the last one. He said, you just hang in there. You just do it consistently, and you try to do a little bit better each month and each year. That's the secret. Consistency is more important than genius. If you hang in there and keep doing it, and as long as you see signs that it's working, and it might not necessarily be money at first. If people call you up and say, oh, I saw this content you made. Will you be on my podcast? It's working. If someone says, hey, I heard you on the show. Can I ask you a question? It's working. People are paying attention. Those are leading indicators to bigger things. Don't give up. As long as you see those qualitative measures that people are paying attention to you, it's working. Don't give up and stick with it.
Well, and it's interesting because it's signs that things are working is different than just having things that are working, right? Meaning it doesn't mean it's necessarily done all the things you want it to do, but you start seeing indications. I also think it's interesting, this notion of consistency, because to use your LeBron James example again, the difference between LeBron James and just other really good basketball players in the NBA is the consistency day in and day out. That there's lots of people probably in the NBA who can score, 30 points in a game on a given day. In fact, there's a bunch of people who could probably do that repeatedly. It's not a fluke. But to be able to do that and have impact in every game, 82 games a year, and the playoffs, and when you're not feeling well, and when you're having a bad day and you fought with your spouse that day, and still be able to do that becomes rare in terms of that level of consistency.
Bingo. Exactly right. And I know I'm going to get sick. I know I'm going to have a bad day. I know I'm going to go on vacation. And you know what? I've blogged ahead. There have been even times I've created podcasts ahead. There was one time a few months ago, I had COVID. I couldn't speak. I couldn't do my podcast episode. I've never missed an episode in 12 years. I thought, what am I going to do? You know what I did? I used AI. I could write a podcast. I did an entire voice synthesis podcast. I think maybe it sounded just like me. It freaked people out.
Okay.
But I think maybe I was the first person to ever do that. But the point is, you just don't quit. You just don't give up. Just like all those, athletes or celebrities who we think, they were just born at the top. They weren't. They worked and worked and worked. I was watching like March Madness. They talked about these college basketball players that, they do like 5,000 free throws a week or something. It's just like ridiculous how hard they work because they have a vision. They want to be the best and they don't give up. And it's the same in our field too.
Well, and to ask the question the opposite way, what are the biggest mistakes besides giving up that people, when they want to become a creator, become an influencer, build a personal brand, what are the biggest mistakes people make or the things they spend their time on that doesn't really matter much, but yet they devote a lot of their energy to it?
I think a big mistake is thinking too much that it's all about you. A personal brand really has to be, now maybe if you're, again, there's sort of like this difference about people, people love them because they're beautiful or they can sing well or something like that. But really, I think a big mistake that people make, especially in the business world, is, I look at their website, it has all their awards. And social proof is important. I'm not dismissing that. But the most important thing is that I want to see is, this is the problem I solve for you. And here's how I uniquely solve it, right? And so you're teaching people how to break the internet, right? How to become known on the internet. I think that's fantastic. I think that's great. It's not all about you. You are serving your audience. You're helping them achieve something. If you have something that's all about you, that could be a passion project, that could be a hobby, but that's not necessarily something that someone's going to pay you for. You've got to be very clear that a personal brand is about serving people. It's about helping them solve a problem in a unique way. And that's how you really build your brand.
Well, and even when, it might be something that seems more, just for entertainment or just for some value, it actually is still about your audience, even though when it seems like attention is on you. I remember I learned this because we did a lot of viral cat videos to break the internet for our marketing agency had tons of cat food brands, and we had Meow Mix and 9 Lives as clients. So we're making a lot of viral cat content, but the content that always did the best was always the things that was actually audience focused. It was just delivered through cats. We would have a cat who knocked over a plant, and cats knock things over. But we'd have a caption on that would say, you know what? Mistakes happen. You break stuff. That's okay. Give yourself a break. Don't worry about it. And it was always that insight about the audience, right? Or we'd have a cat, sleeping for, and the little caption would say, hey, I sleep for 17, 18, 19, but never 20 hours in a row. That would be excessive. And then it was always hit the snooze button. You deserve to sleep in. When we made it about the audience, even with cats, which are cute, which are naturally viral, still content that was about the audience than about the cat always did better.
Yeah, because you're still. It gets back to the very first thing we talked about, that a brand is about building that emotional expectation, and if you can connect to people and their cats, that's about as big as you can get.
Well, final question for you, Mark, is, what do you think for the person? Do you think this is just a, content creation influence? Is it just a young person's game at this point? Or do you think it's something a lot of the tools have become dominated by, those that are maybe earlier out in their career? Or do you think there's room for those who, maybe aren't as early, but could still, create something of value?
What a lovely question, Ben. I wrote my first blog when I was 49, maybe 50. I didn't do my first professional speaking engagement till I was 52. When I started out, I had a colleague who was he was at the top of his field. He had the biggest podcast in the world, and he said, Mark, you're too late and you're too old. And honestly, now I'm bigger than him.
Okay.
So, I mean,
how do you like me now? How do you like me now?
How do you like me now, baby?
Yeah.
But it really is. I mean, I wasn't preoccupied with anything. I just was preoccupied with doing my best and creating great content and really helping people and being kind and being generous. To me, it was important to set an example that to succeed on the web, you didn't have to be toxic and you didn't have to be mean. You could be kind. You could lift people up. You could try to, unify. And I think people were ready for that. If you think about 2008, 2009, it was starting to get really, really toxic on the web. So, people liked hearing from a person like me. So, I mean, I think I'm living proof that, even an unexpected, person like me can do well. And it's just really about having the courage to start and having the courage to show yourself, to show up. Something I've had to learn. It was not easy for me to be open, to be vulnerable. I grew up in a family that was very stoic. You didn't talk about your emotions, and I kind of had to learn how to do that. But if you have the courage to add your own story, that to be original, you have to stand out. To stand out, you only have one choice. There's only one you. You have to tell your story. You have to add your story to whatever you do. And that it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter how old you are. Anybody has the opportunity to do that.
To build on your 4 points, and of course your book, Known in 2017, Return on Influence in 2012, more recently Belonging to the Brand in 2023, I would add one little precursor and corollary to everything you said, which is that you have to believe that you have something of value to offer before you do anything else, before you do any of this. And ultimately, as I believe in it, I think you do too, Mark, it sounds like it, that like all of us have something of value to offer. And that first little bit of self-belief in yourself. And if you don't quite have it yet, you fake it for a little bit and then you kind of grow into it. But like ultimately, you've got to have something to say. And I believe everyone has something to say of great value. I
agree. I couldn't agree with you more.
Well, great. Well, there you have it. Mark Schaefer, we're in the Agreement or Mutual Admiration Society, whatever it is. Great work. Thanks for having us. Thanks for being on the show. And thanks to you for your insights and how to break the internet.
Thank you so much, Ben.